For most of human history, power was something we could see. It had faces, voices, symbols, and locations. A king on a throne, a priest in a temple, a general on a battlefield. Authority was embodied in people, and because it was embodied, it could be confronted. Even when power was absolute, it remained human. It relied on loyalty, fear, belief, and sometimes violence. Today, that ancient structure is quietly dissolving. Power is no longer concentrating in individuals alone. It is migrating into systems that observe, calculate, and predict human behavior at a scale no human mind can comprehend. This shift is not dramatic, it is administrative. It unfolds through software updates, efficiency improvements, and promises of convenience. No revolution is required when people voluntarily plug themselves into the mechanisms that monitor them. Every message sent, every route chosen, every hesitation before clicking becomes a data point. Individually, these fragments are meaningless. Together, they form a detailed map of human behavior. The center of power is moving away from those who rule by command and toward those who rule by correlation. In earlier eras, rulers needed to understand societies. They relied on advisors, spies, censuses, and crude statistics. Their vision was always limited and delayed. Decisions were made with partial information, guided by intuition and ideology. Now information flows continuously. Systems do not wait for reports, they update themselves in real time, they do not guess, they calculate probabilities. When power is backed by constant feedback loops, it becomes adaptive, flexible, and extremely difficult to escape. What makes this transformation unprecedented is not surveillance alone. Societies have always been watched. The true change lies in interpretation. Data by itself is passive. Power emerges when data is analyzed, connected, and used to influence decisions. When a system knows not just where people are, but how they feel, what they desire, and what they are likely to do next, it acquires a form of understanding that surpasses human judgment. This understanding does not come from empathy or wisdom, but from pattern recognition across millions of lives. As this process deepens, authority slowly shifts from human experience to algorithmic assessment. A person may believe they know themselves best, yet a system that has tracked their behavior for years may predict their choices more accurately than they can. The system does not need to convince them of its superiority. It demonstrates it quietly, by offering recommendations that feel right, decisions that save time, and outcomes that reduce uncertainty. Trust grows not through persuasion, but through performance. Over time, this trust reshapes how decisions are made. People begin to defer, not because they are forced, but because deferring feels rational. If a system consistently chooses the fastest route, the most suitable content, the most compatible partner, or the most effective strategy, resistance starts to look inefficient. Autonomy becomes something people keep in theory while abandoning in practice. The political consequences of this shift are profound. In the past, control depended on controlling information flows, what people could read, hear, and say. Today, information is abundant. Control operates at a deeper level, shaping attention rather than restricting speech. When algorithms decide which ideas appear first, which voices are amplified, and which topics quietly disappear into obscurity, censorship becomes unnecessary. People still speak freely, but within invisible boundaries defined by engagement metrics and predictive models. This creates a new kind of obedience. It is not enforced through fear of punishment, but through alignment of incentives. People follow the path that feels most natural, most rewarding, most convenient. The system does not say you must. It says people like you usually choose this. And in doing so, it subtly rewires the relationship between choice and freedom. The danger is not that humans will lose all agency overnight. The danger is gradual erosion. Each small delegation of judgment seems harmless. Each reliance on automated decision-making appears sensible. Yet as more decisions are outsourced, the human capacity to judge, reflect, and doubt weakens. Skills that are not exercised deteriorate. Over time, societies may retain the language of freedom while losing its substance. This is how power becomes invisible. There is no single ruler to oppose, no palace to storm, no ideology to overthrow. Power is distributed across networks, embedded in infrastructure, hidden behind interfaces, designed to feel neutral and helpful. When something goes wrong, responsibility dissolves. Was it the data, the model, the user, the company, the system itself? In such a world, resistance becomes conceptually difficult. How do you rebel against a probability? How do you argue with a prediction that keeps coming true because it shapes the conditions that make it true? Traditional political tools were designed to confront human authority. They are poorly suited to challenge mathematical governance. Education alone does not solve this problem. Knowledge does not automatically translate into power when systems operate faster than human cognition. Transparency is also insufficient. Even if algorithms are open, their complexity exceeds the capacity of most citizens to understand or contest them. A society can be fully informed and still be effectively guided. This is why the shift from leaders to data represents more than a technological change. It is a civilizational transformation. For thousands of years, humans believed that authority ultimately rested in human judgment, divine or rational. Today, judgment is increasingly measured, quantified, and automated. What cannot be translated into data risks being ignored. What cannot be optimized is treated as inefficient. Yet the most important aspects of human life, meaning, values, dignity, do not lend themselves easily to measurement. When decisions are made primarily on the basis of data, these elements may survive only as background noise. The system does not hate them, it simply does not see them. This is the quiet paradox of the data age. The more precisely systems understand behavior, the less they understand purpose. The more efficiently societies function, the less clear it becomes why they function at all. Power grows stronger as it becomes less visible, and freedom weakens as it becomes more comfortable. The shift is not inevitable, but it is seductive. It does not demand submission, it invites participation. And once participation becomes habitual, the line between choice and control becomes increasingly difficult to draw. People often imagine the loss of freedom as something loud and dramatic. They picture tanks in the streets, books burning, voices silenced by force. But the most effective systems of control in history were rarely built on constant violence. They were built on habits, routines, and quiet acceptance. Today, a new form of control is emerging, one that does not need to intimidate the body because it has learned how to influence the mind. Human beings have always traded freedom for comfort. We did it when we accepted kings in exchange for security, when we accepted factories in exchange for wages, and when we accepted surveillance in exchange for safety. What is different now is the scale and precision of that trade. Never before has a system been able to monitor billions of individuals simultaneously, learn from their behavior in real time, and adjust its influence with mathematical accuracy. This is not coercion in the traditional sense. It is optimization. Control no longer depends on telling people what to do. It depends on shaping the environment so that people voluntarily do what the system prefers. When navigation apps guide our routes, recommendation engines select our information, and automated systems determine our credit, employment, and visibility, power shifts quietly from human institutions to invisible infrastructures. Decisions still appear personal, but the framework within which those decisions are made is increasingly pre-designed. In such a world, resistance becomes difficult, not because it is forbidden, but because it feels unnecessary. Why rebel against something that feels useful? Why question a system that saves time, reduces friction, and anticipates needs? When control is comfortable, it does not feel like control at all. Fear was once the primary tool of domination. Today, precision is replacing fear. Algorithms do not need to scare populations into obedience. They only need to understand them well enough. By analyzing patterns of behavior, emotional responses, and biological signals, systems can predict how individuals will react before they are even aware of their own inclinations. The result is a form of governance that operates beneath consciousness. This kind of power does not punish disobedience after the fact. It prevents disobedience before it occurs. If a system can identify which content will calm you, distract you, or exhaust you, it can neutralize dissent without ever confronting it. Outrage is redirected, attention is diluted, motivation is absorbed into endless cycles of consumption and reaction. The system does not silence opposition. It simply ensures that opposition never coheres. Comfort plays a crucial role in this transformation. People rarely surrender autonomy because they are forced to. They surrender it because doing so makes life easier. Automated decisions relieve the burden of choice. Personalized systems reduce uncertainty. Predictive technologies promise safety, health, and efficiency. Each individual surrender feels small and rational. Over time, these micro-concessions accumulate into a profound loss of agency. When systems know our preferences, they begin to shape them. What starts as assistance turns into guidance, and guidance slowly becomes dependence. The more we rely on external systems to decide for us, the less we practice making independent judgments. Skills of critical thinking, patience, and self-reflection atrophy, not because they are forbidden, but because they are no longer required. At this point, control becomes self-sustaining. People defend the systems that manage them, not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. To reject the system would mean to face complexity, uncertainty, and responsibility once again. It is easier to comply than to question, easier to scroll than to stop, easier to accept than to resist. The most unsettling aspect of this transformation is that it does not require a single mastermind. There is no central figure issuing orders, no grand conspiracy directing every outcome. Power emerges from feedback loops, economic incentives, and technological momentum. Systems evolve because they are efficient, not because they are moral. They optimize for engagement, prediction, and control because those qualities are profitable and scalable. This means that even those who design these systems may not fully control them. Once data-driven infrastructures reach sufficient complexity, they begin to shape human behavior in ways that no individual intended. Responsibility becomes diffused, harm becomes abstract, and accountability disappears into layers of code and corporate structures. In such conditions, the traditional tools of political resistance lose their effectiveness. Protests target leaders, but leadership is no longer the center of power. Laws regulate actions, but influence operates at the level of emotion and attention. Elections offer choices, but the desires behind those choices are increasingly engineered. The danger is not that humans will be enslaved against their will. The danger is that they will stop recognizing what freedom feels like. When comfort replaces autonomy and prediction replaces choice, the very language of liberty begins to sound outdated. People may still speak about rights and democracy, but their daily lives are guided by systems they do not understand and cannot challenge. Education alone does not solve this problem. Information alone does not restore freedom. In a world where data flows faster than reflection, awareness requires effort, It requires slowing down in an environment designed to accelerate. It requires questioning systems that reward obedience and punish hesitation with inconvenience. The future of human freedom will not be decided by dramatic revolutions or heroic leaders. It will be decided in ordinary moments, when individuals choose whether to think or to be guided, whether to understand or to accept, whether to remain aware or to remain comfortable. This is the quiet test of our time, not whether we can overthrow dictators, but whether we can recognize control when it feels like convenience, not whether we can defend freedom with force, but whether we can preserve it in our own minds. What makes the coming form of control so difficult to resist is not its brutality, but its accuracy. For centuries, power operated through crude tools, laws written in general terms, punishments applied broadly, propaganda broadcast to millions regardless of who they were. These methods were inefficient. They treated humans as groups rather than as individuals. But data-driven systems do the opposite. They learn each person separately. They build a psychological profile that is constantly updated, corrected, refined. Over time, this profile becomes more intimate than anything you consciously know about yourself. It knows what captures your attention, what makes you hesitate, what makes you comply. When influence becomes this precise, resistance becomes statistically unlikely rather than morally difficult. In the past, rebellion was possible because power was blind. Authorities did not know who was about to rebel, who was quietly doubting, who could be persuaded, and who could not. Today, patterns of behavior reveal inner states. A pause before clicking, a change in tone, a deviation from routine. These are not trivial signals. They are data points. And when enough of these points are gathered, they reveal tendencies. The system does not need to read your thoughts. It only needs to predict your next action with sufficient probability. When predictions are accurate enough, power no longer reacts to behavior, it preempts it. This is why the future of control is not about forbidding choices, but about shaping the environment in which choices are made. If an algorithm knows that presenting a certain idea at a specific moment will reduce your likelihood of questioning authority, it does not need to suppress alternative ideas. It simply delays them, buries them, or surrounds them with emotional signals that make them feel unattractive or extreme. From the inside, you still feel free. You feel as if you have considered the options and made a rational decision. From the outside, your behavior fits perfectly into a predicted pattern. The most profound shift is that obedience no longer requires awareness. In earlier systems, people knew they were obeying. They recognized the pressure. Today, compliance can happen without the experience of constraint. When systems anticipate desires before they fully form, they do not coerce behavior, they complete it. The line between what you want and what you are guided to want becomes blurred. Over time, this erodes the very idea of an inner, autonomous self. The self becomes a surface on which data operates. The real danger is not that people will be forced into submission, but that submission will feel like self-expression. When individuals believe that their preferences are entirely their own, they stop examining the forces that shape those preferences. Awareness fades not because it is suppressed, but because it is no longer felt as necessary. The system works best when it remains invisible, when people cannot distinguish between internal impulse and external influence. In such a world, freedom does not disappear in a dramatic moment. It slowly dissolves into convenience. What makes this especially powerful is that these systems improve with every act of participation. Every use makes them smarter. Every moment of trust deepens their reach. Unlike traditional rulers, they do not grow weaker as they expand. They grow stronger. The more lives they manage, the better they understand human behavior as a whole. They begin to recognize patterns that no individual and no government could ever perceive. At that point, power no longer belongs to those who claim authority, but to those who control interpretation. When behavior can be predicted and guided at scale, resistance becomes an anomaly, not because it is punished, but because it is inefficient. Those who resist appear irrational, uncooperative, unoptimized. Their voices are not silenced, they are marginalized by metrics. They fall outside the preferred patterns, and so they are gradually excluded from influence, opportunity, and visibility. Control does not need to eliminate opposition, it only needs to make it irrelevant. This leads to a profound transformation in how societies understand responsibility. When decisions are guided by systems that claim superior knowledge, human judgment is downgraded. Mistakes are attributed to individuals, while the systems that shaped their choices remain unquestioned. People are told they are free, yet they are evaluated, ranked, and steered continuously. Freedom becomes a technical term rather than a lived experience. It exists on paper, but not in practice. The most unsettling consequence is that this form of control does not require cruelty. It can coexist with comfort, entertainment, and even a sense of happiness. People may feel safer, more understood, more efficiently served than ever before. And precisely because life feels manageable, the motivation to question the underlying structure disappears. When survival is no longer threatened, meaning becomes easier to outsource. This is how awareness quietly erodes, not through censorship, but through saturation, not through fear, but through familiarity. When every moment is mediated, measured, and optimized, there is little space left for silence, doubt, or reflection. And without reflection, there can be no resistance. The system does not need to convince you that it is right. It only needs to ensure that you never pause long enough to ask whether it is. In such a world, the most radical act is not rebellion, but consciousness. To notice patterns, to question recommendations, to reclaim moments of unoptimized thought. Yet even this becomes increasingly difficult when attention itself is managed. When focus is fragmented, awareness becomes fragile. And when awareness weakens, control no longer feels like control at all. What matters now is not whether technology will continue to advance, because that is inevitable. What matters is whether human awareness can advance with it. Systems that collect data do not ask whether they should guide our lives. They simply do so because they can. And if humans do not actively defend their capacity to think, to doubt, and to choose, that capacity will not be taken by force. It will be forgotten. The future will not be decided by those who control the loudest voices, but by those who control attention, interpretation, and meaning. Power will belong to whoever defines what is normal, what is relevant, and what is ignored. In such a world, freedom is not lost overnight. It fades quietly as people trade uncertainty for comfort and responsibility for automation. The question is no longer whether we are being watched, but whether we are still watching ourselves. Awareness is no longer a philosophical luxury, it is a form of survival. If humans wish to remain more than predictable patterns in a database, they must learn to pause, to reflect, and to resist the temptation of effortless obedience. The future remains open, only as long as humans are willing to remain conscious. Thank you for giving your time, your attention, and your thought to this moment. Thank you for choosing to listen to our reflect and to question in a world that increasingly prefers speed over understanding. Your awareness matters more than you may realize.
I don't think it's possible to predict the future, but thinking about the future makes it possible to reflect on the meaning of what is happening right now, of the choices, the decisions we make right now, because many of these choices will have an effect for decades, maybe centuries to come. The present cannot be understood separately from the past, but neither can be understood separately from the future. When comparing AI, say, to the threat of nuclear war has no upside. It has no supporters. It's a huge, huge threat, especially in today's world, when we see that countries like Russia are just completely disregarding the biggest taboos of the international system. Since 1945, the biggest taboo of the international system was that a strong country cannot just invade and try to conquer and destroy a weaker country. And now this is broken. So the danger is huge, but at least everybody understands the danger. There are no winners in a nuclear war. With AI, it's a much more complicated challenge. There is a huge positive potential, and people find it very difficult to understand what the threats are. Ever since the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was at least clear to humans what is the danger of nuclear technology. You don't need long explanations. With AI, it's difficult to grasp the danger because it's really an alien threat.
AIs are able to learn and change by themselves, to make decisions by themselves, to invent new ideas by themselves. If a machine cannot do that, it's not really an AI. So a coffee machine that just makes you coffee automatically, but by a pre-programmed way, and it never learns anything new, it's just an automatic machine. It becomes an AI if, as you approach the coffee machine, the machine, before you press any button, addresses you and says to you, I've been watching you for the last weeks or months, and based on everything I've learned about you and your facial expression and the time of day and so forth, I predict you would like an espresso, so I already took the liberty to make a cup for you. If it then tells you, actually, I've invented a new drink that no human ever thought about before, I call it Bespresso, and I think it's better than espresso, you would like it more, and I took the liberty to prepare a cup for you, then it's really an AI.